Again, I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to join us for this broadcast. And I certainly hope that everything is going well with you and God is blessing you in your life. You know, I feel sure that all of us would agree that the Bible teaches that God will bless his people. There are several verses contained in the Bible that shows this sentiment. But obviously we cannot look at them all, but let's notice just one for just a moment. In 2 Chronicles 16 and verse 9, we find these words, "For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show himself strong on behalf of those whose heart is loyal to him." Notice this verse tells us that God is looking after his children, that he wants to help them. He wants to be loyal to his children and bless them. In contrast to that, notice Proverbs 28 and verse 9. "One who turns his ear away from hearing the law, even his prayer is an abomination." This verse kind of gives the other side of the coin, and there are several verses in the Bible that show this sentiment as well. God cares for and blesses his people. However, those who are disobedient have no such promise. God will turn his ear away from hearing their prayers. Proverbs even says that the prayer of a wicked man is an abomination. Now, abomination is a very strong word, and it really means to make God sick. In other words, God is basically saying that if you are not obedient to me, then even your prayers make me sick. Now, many would like to think then that without God, life would be just a long series of blunders, heartaches, disappointments, and failures. I mean, if God is not helping us at all, then how can we achieve any kind of success? Well, that's what people would like to think, but we know that's obviously not true. Many people of this world become very wealthy, but many Christians do not. Many non-Christians have happy marriages and good families. Many Christians do not. Many wicked people seem to enjoy life to the fullest, while some Christians have multiple heartaches. Now, some may look at life and ask the question, well, why should we serve God then? If I can achieve great success and I can make it through just life just as well as anybody else without God, then what benefit is it to serving God? Even David wondered about that. He wrote in Psalm 73 and verse 3, "For I was envious of the boastful when I saw the prosperity of the wicked." But then later on in that same chapter, we find that he was boastful until he thought about the end. You see, David realized that this life is not the end. This life is not all there is, because there's another life after this. And then when he realized that part, then that made all the difference in the world, we might say. You see, it is true that man might be able to achieve amazing worldly success without God. I mean, we find examples of that all around us, don't we? There's many people in the world who seem to have everything going for them, and yet they're certainly not right before God. They make no pretense of trying to serve God. In the Bible, we can find examples like that as well. I just want to look for just a few moments today about one man in the Old Testament. He was a very successful king of Israel. He's only mentioned in 5 verses. 1 Kings 16, verses 23 through 28. His name was Omri. He was a very successful king of Israel. He only reigned 12 years, but apparently he was one of the most capable kings that Israel ever had in its short history. And yet he did it all without the help of God. How do we know that? Because 1 Kings 16 verse 25 summarizes his life by saying, "Omri did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and did worse than all who were before him." Notice here it says Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord, even worse than all the ones that before him. So Omri indeed was a very wicked man as far as relationship with God is concerned. And yet, as far as the world is concerned, we would consider him a great success. For example, he was a very renowned soldier, known even beyond the borders of Israel. He was a strong warrior, a strong leader of the army, a strong king. When he came to the throne, Israel was a nation in chaos and turmoil. The previous king had been murdered after reigning only 2 years. Half the people wanted Omri to be king, the other half wanted a man by the name of Tibni to be king. And it seems that these men shared the kingship for 4 or 5 years. Now, you know, a nation that is divided like this would be easy prey to the other nations. And yet, even after 4 or 5 years, we find that Omri was able to unite Israel, and he became so powerful a king that even a century later, 3 Assyrian rulers referred to Israel as the house of Omri. Indeed, people may have looked at him and said, truly, he is blessed by God. But the scripture declares him wicked and in continual violation of God's will. So Omri was a strong king. We also find that he was a man of very practical wisdom. He changed the capital of Israel to Samaria, a city which was more easily defended than the other cities that had been used as capitals. And it seemed to have been a wise choice, as it remained the capital until the nation was completely destroyed about 160 years later. So apparently Omri was an intelligent and wise king, and yet he was spiritually blind. Now, since Omri was a king, I think we can safely assume that he was probably materially wealthy and enjoyed the good things of life. Certainly he enjoyed more wealth and more luxuries than I'm sure most other people in the nation would have. So he was a man with wealth. He was also a man who became very popular. He achieved permanent notoriety. He is the first Jewish king whose name is mentioned in Assyrian inscriptions. On a stone that is called now the Moabite stone, he is mentioned twice. And these lines, on these stone are lines written that says, Omri was the king of Israel, and he afflicted Moab many days. Now Omri had taken possession of all the land of Medeba, and dwelt in it during his days, and half the days of his son. Now the one who wrote this stone was Mesha. He was a Moabite king, mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 3 and verse 4. Now Mesha was basically bragging about his conquest, because you see Omri had defeated his father, taken some of the lands of the Moabites. But then Mesha had come along and defeated Omri, recovered all the land that his father had lost and some other besides. And so Mesha is bragging that said, I'm greater than my father. In other words, Mesha is basically saying, I am greater than the greatest. So Omri was a great king, a great warrior, a pure man with material wealth. And so from our earthly standpoint, we would think Omri was a great success because he achieved great wealth, success, and notoriety, all without the help of God, because we've already read how that his kingship exceeded all before him in wickedness. The statutes of Omri became a byword of life, for a life opposed to the life of God. Even many years later, we find that Micah 6 and verse 16 refers to him by saying, For the statutes of Omri are kept, all the works of Ahab's house are done, and you walk in their counsels. Now Micah was one of the latter prophets of the nation of Israel and Judah. And notice that it says, regards to Israel, that even toward the end of the resistance of the northern kingdom, Micah talks about Israel as being Omri, or the house of Omri, and the works of Omri. So indeed, Omri had a great influence even throughout the rest of the existence of his nation. So from a worldly standpoint, Omri achieved outstanding success. And yet when he died, Scripture summarized his life by simply saying in verse 28, so Omri rested with his fathers and was buried in Samaria. Then Ahab his son reigned in his place. Now we would just look at the life of Omri alone. We might think, well, why do I need to serve God then? Why should I spend any time at all thinking about God? Because here was a man who seemingly achieved everything that man would ever want in this life. And he did it all without God. Well, see, we need to remember that any success earned in this life is empty, hollow, and helpless, or hopeless rather, at least without God. You see, we might be able to achieve worldly success without God, but that's all we're going to get. One day, we're going to all face the judgment. And on that day, if we are living without God, our lives will be marked as failure. If you want to become rich, famous, have great worldly vision, then you might be able to achieve that without God. But as Christ said to the Pharisees who loved the praise of men in Matthew 6 and verse 2, they have their reward. In other words, if you want success in this world, you might achieve that without God, but that's all you're going to get. You see, we need to remember that there's eternity waiting after this life is over. And that's far more important than the temporary success that we might gain in this world. But if we do not live with God in this life, what kind of success will we have then? And of course, the answer is absolutely none. If we do not have God in this life, then you cannot have God in the next life. And if that's true, then we will be utter failures. There's a story told of a conversation between a father and his son who was graduating from high school. The father asked his son what his plans were. He replied, you know that I will go to college. The father asked, well, then what? The son said he would get a job. Then what? Asked the father. And the son again said, I will get married and raise a family. And the father continued asking, then what? And the son replied, I will make a lot of money so I can retire. And the father asked another question, then what? The son said, well, I guess I will die. And then the father asked another question, well, then what? Well, see, the son had no answer for that question. He bowed his head because he had not really thought about that. You see, he had many plans for this life, but none for the next life. You know, that describes the situation of multitudes of people on this earth. We make all kinds of plans for this life, but very few for the next life. You see, in this life, we can achieve success without the help of God. But for eternity, there can be no success without God. And that's what we need to be thinking about. We need to make plans for the next life. People often plan for retirement, plan for how they can have enough money to last to the end of this life so that when they get older and can't work too much, then they'll have some money so they can live on that and make it through the rest of their days. Nothing wrong with those plans. But what about the plans for eternity? Do we make plans for the next life? And again, as was said before, we can achieve success in this life without God. But for eternity, there can be no success without God. I hope you will think about that and make your life right with God if it's not. Thank you.